Hi everybody, this is Maya Good, and I am here today with a book review for The Girl with All the Gifts. Before I get started, first off, please excuse the background noise. I am sitting outside of Starbucks in Savannah, Georgia. If you want to know why I'm in Savannah, Georgia, or how I got to Savannah, Georgia, please go to the Quotidian Light YouTube channel. I will include a link in the comments, in the down bar. So, the other thing before we get going is, if you have not read this book, and you're planning on reading this book, do not watch this review. This book is one of the few books that I will say, the more I knew about it before reading it, the less I enjoyed the book. So, there are just certain aspects of this book that are much, much better if you don't know about them going into it. And so, let me give you, to the count of 3, to turn this video off, go read the book, and then come back and watch the review and tell me what you thought of the book in the comment section. So 1, 2, 3. So I've been wanting to read this for a while. I first heard about this book about maybe 6 months after it came out. So it was a couple years ago. And I was really excited about it. I was excited about the premise. Unfortunately, the premise was spoiled for me multiple times online. And I didn't think anything of it because I actually like to be spoiled. A lot of times if I get really tense when I'm reading something, I will actually go to the Wikipedia page and read what's coming up to kind of release the tension a little bit so I can continue with the book. So I didn't think anything of it going into this book, but I can definitely tell that having known certain aspects of the story ahead of time really diminished my enjoyment of the book. Also, I would say, if I was to categorize this book, I wouldn't really call it horror. I think it falls underneath horror just superficially. I think that this feels like a YA book, and I think it fits well within that genre. So I would call it YA horror, but this is not a book where you're going to get scared. This is not a book where you're going to feel that sense of, oh my God, what's going to happen next, as you're reading it, like you would some classic horror novels like Stephen King or Dracula, Frankenstein, the classic, what we think of when we think of as horror. This is much more intellectual horror, and it really gets into some moral ambiguity that I thought was really courageous for the writer to attack in such a way. So, when I started reading this book, I knew that the girl was a zombie hybrid, or a zombie. She's not a hybrid. She is a zombie, but she's second generation zombie. I didn't know she was second generation. I knew that she was a zombie who had retained... I knew ahead of time that she was a zombie who had retained some human aspects. I knew that she was going to be experimented on. I really didn't know anything else about the story, but just knowing that spoiled it for me. I will say, as you're reading this book, you do find out she's a zombie fairly early. But it's later on in the first third of the book, and having known that in advance really released a lot of that tension of not quite feeling unsure of what's going on in the story. I can see that I would have enjoyed it more had I remained more unsure. As the story develops, in the beginning, I will say, for the first half of the book, I was not enjoying it as much. I found the main protagonist, Melanie, I found her voice to be annoying and unrealistic. As you guys know, I'm very picky when it comes to my child narrators. Child narrators are really tricky to write. You can either do it really, really well or really, really badly. And having written a bunch of short stories dealing with children and having not completely grown up myself, when I read a child narrator that doesn't strike me as honest and realistic, it really gets to me. And the difficulty with that is this child narrator, she's in a circumstance where normal children wouldn't be in. She's locked up. She goes to school, but she doesn't have any friends. These are all things that put her closer to the child narrator and, say, a book like Room than a book like, oh gosh, what was the name of the book we read with Literary Roadhouse Book Club? Something Elephants. I can't remember. So I don't expect her to sound like a normal child. I expected her to sound like a child who's been traumatized. And that was something I didn't get. I think that would have made it feel more real to me. For the first half of the novel, every time I was in Melanie's point of view, I was annoyed. heavily annoyed. I enjoyed the hero worship she has with her teacher. I found that concept to be very well done. I found the execution not quite on the mark. And that's just coming from a woman who previously had that similar situation where I worshipped my third grade teacher, and I know what that feels like. And I feel like the writer, when he was portraying that relationship, I don't know if it was because he's a male. I mean, he has young children. I'm assuming one of them is a daughter. I think there's something that happens when, as an adult, you assume how a child will feel in a certain situation, and a lot of times you're not necessarily on the mark. And her hero worship of her teacher was a very realistic thing to have happen, but her thoughts about it when we're in her point of view did not strike me as at their core what a child in that situation would have felt like. There's a fuzzy line there between, told you I'm outside. There's a fuzzy line there between worshiping your teacher as a parental figure or as what you want to be when you grow up, and worshiping them as a sexual figure. And I do feel like that line is really fuzzy in this. And that is something that happens to young children. They get crushes on adults, but this was not that kind of crush, and I felt like it sounded a bit too much like that kind of crush. And I'm probably the only person that's going to pick up on this. It just bugged me a little bit. After about the first half of the novel, I felt like the child narrator voice got much stronger. She became more interesting. Her thoughts were much more complex. As she is receiving all this outside input of a new environment, new people, new experiences, she really grows as a character. And I felt like that growth was needed. And I felt like that growth was done really, really well and very realistically. The other characters in the novel, Ms. Justineau, I really enjoyed her. I found her to be a very interesting and strong character. Her little fling towards the end, I knew that was going to happen. Like, that was foretold chapters in advance. And I don't know if that was on purpose on the part of the author. If not, then, that's something that would have, it kind of bugged me a little bit, that I knew it was going to happen and it wasn't happening yet. But I liked what happened in the immediate aftermath of that, and that release of tension and hope that the author gives you as a reader, and then all of a sudden you're just slammed down into the ground. I thought that was amazing, and I was at the end of the book, I really wanted to know what happened to Justineau. Like, I really wanted to know. Part of me, as I was reading this, was thinking, whoa, what if she's pregnant? Should she be made into a zombie so that her baby can survive? Like, those were the thoughts that were going through my head when I got to the end of the book. How did I feel about the book overall? I liked the book enough, and this goes into how I told you guys before, the Literary Roadhouse podcast is really ruining my ability to read fun books. Anyway, garbage trucks. I told you guys. Outside, Savannah, Georgia. Garbage. I got all kinds of stuff, but garbage trucks are better than tourists, so we're gonna do this. So, I liked it well enough. I feel like had I read this 5 years ago, I would have loved this book. Had I read this as a teenager, I would have loved this book. Right now, something is holding me back from loving this book. And it's not the language. The language is well done. It's not overly simplified. The vocabulary is interesting and wonderful, and there's some beautiful use of language within the book. The characters are well done for the most part, with the exception of Melanie during the first half of the book. I did feel like the soldier, and right now I can't remember his name, but I felt like his character could have been fleshed out a bit more. But there was something about this book that left me disappointed, and I've been really trying to put my finger on it for the past week. It took me a while to get into the book, just because the child narrator was so annoying in the beginning. But once I finished the book and I realized, I like this book, but I don't love this book. Why is that? And I started really trying to figure out what it was about the book that did that for me. And I think what it is that the author starts to touch on really important themes of ethics, of what it means to be human. And when he touches on those, he does so in a non-nuanced way. And that lack of nuance really removes some of the complexity from your experience of reading it as a reader. And so while those questions were really interesting, I don't think they were done in a way that really prompted me to close the book and then sit and think about it, or go do dishes and can't get the book out of my head. There was definitely something lacking in that department. I do think that part of it might be because this is probably meant for a slightly younger audience, and a lot of authors want to make things more explicit for younger readers. Wow. Just as I'm recording, now we have a fire truck. Really. So, but as someone who read a lot as a youth, even as a youth, I really appreciated nuance. And I really appreciated books that made me try to figure stuff out on my own. And I felt like the answers in this book were too obvious. They were too patent. The writer's opinions were too obvious. And that removed some of the post-reading enjoyment for me. I also felt like while the language was well done, it wasn't remarkable. There were some lines that were quite remarkable, but as a whole, when I think about the language, there was nothing about the writing of the book that was remarkable. I will say the concept definitely was remarkable. This is done in a way that I would not have expected. It is an amazing combination of subgenres, and it's an idea of zombies that we haven't really seen before. And so, do I like this book? Yes. Do I love it? No. Who would I recommend this book for? I would recommend this book for young adults. I would recommend this book for adults who like more intellectual horror. I would recommend this book for people that like zombies but feel like it's getting played out and are annoyed by the current zombie tropes. And I would recommend this book really heavily for adults that haven't been reading for a while and are getting back into reading, because I felt like this book didn't take long to read. It took me a while to get into it, but that's just because I'm getting pickier and pickier as time goes on. But, there was nothing about this book that really produced a barrier to entry. So that is my review. What am I going to give it on Goodreads? I hate it. I hate grading books on Goodreads because I feel like instead of like 1 to 5 stars, it should be like, for the writing, what are your stars? For the plot, what are your stars? You know what I mean? So what I will say is I'm giving this a solid 3 on Goodreads. It feels like a 3. It's good, but it's not amazing. And it was something that I enjoyed, but it didn't really stick with me. And on that note, ciao.